So without a doubt, one of the most recent revolutionary advancements in the content creation space has to be FPV drones. These are extremely capable drones, allowing you to fly at top speeds, rotate and flip in pretty much any direction, and free fall at terminal velocity. Now, DJI had entered the space back in 2019 by creating their own components for FPV, which had completely changed the game. And now, for the first time, DJI has decided to dive in head first and create their very own complete FPV drone. And I have to say, they've really raised the bar to a whole new level for the world of FPV. DJI FPV comes with the FPV drone, a brand new controller that is much smaller and lighter than their previous remote, and they've also slightly modified their last generation of goggles to make them even better. DJI has also created their very own flight simulator, which is basically a video game to simulate flying FPV. So you can develop your skills in the digital world before you actually go out and try to fly in the real world. And lastly, DJI has come out with this thing. It's called a Motion Controller, and it allows you to operate the drone with one hand, which I personally found very fun and intuitive, but I'll dive into that later on in this video. FPV drones have been a vital tool for me to get the types of shots in my videos that really make them stand out. But with all the incredible advantages that come with FPV, there's an equally long list of cons that have made it complicated and hard to get into. The first one is that you run into a lot of issues. In my own experience, I've spent a lot of time troubleshooting and trying to figure out why things aren't working the way they should be, especially when I was just starting out. Now, if you decided to go the route of building your own drones, then you'd have to invest months of time into learning how to put everything together. It's a pretty complicated process and requires you to learn how to solder, which I learned I am not that good at. Even something as simple as charging your batteries would require several different steps and a certain baseline of knowledge to understand how batteries work so you can properly charge and discharge your batteries. And yes, that's something that we had to do in the world of FPV, was discharge our batteries after a couple days if we didn't use them. And honestly, a lot of the time, just trying to get the drone, remote, and goggles to communicate all with each other in the right way could feel like a puzzle. That was mainly before DJI had come out with their FPV system, which definitely changed the game and made it a lot easier. But even with that system, you still had to use third-party components like other flight controllers and third-party software in order to get the whole system to work. But now with DJI FPV, all of that is in the past. First, let's talk about the drone. Now, before I dive into the specs, I just want you guys to hear this. This thing sounds so badass when you turn it on. The first time I saw this drone, I was definitely like, whoa, the design is unlike any of DJI's other drones. It definitely has a very unique look. Now, the first thing that stood out to me about this drone is its battery life. With my normal FPV drones, I would get anywhere from 4 to 6 minutes of flight time depending on the power output and the way that I would fly. That's definitely not much time, and the reason that I had to travel with so many batteries. DJI has managed to make this FPV drone's maximum flight time 20 minutes, which is a huge step forward for FPV. It almost didn't feel right when I was first flying it because I was so used to returning my drone back to the ground after only a couple of minutes of flight time. So to be able to keep this thing up in the air for 20 minutes is really exciting for me. This is definitely DJI's fastest drone to date. In full manual mode, you can reach speeds of up to 140 kilometers per hour and accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in just 2 seconds, which is a lot of fun.
Bro.
You're also now able to flip on every axis, just like a normal FPV drone. Now, you're not able to fly in manual mode right out of the box. In order to unlock manual mode, also known as acro mode, you have to change a few settings in your goggles, and you'll have to loosen your throttle joystick so the stick doesn't automatically spring to the center. This allows you to be in full control of your throttle without having it automatically jump to 50% power. Now, unlike traditional FPV drones, on DJI FPV, we are able to change the pitch of the camera from our remote. Now, this is very beneficial because in FPV, the angle at which your camera is set at directly determines the speed at which you'll be flying. Let me explain. If the camera angle is 0 degrees, then the drone will be in this position when the horizon is center in your goggles. So the thrust from the props is only going down, causing the drone to stay in one place. Now, if we tilt the camera to about 45 degrees, we can see that the drone needs to be tilted this much in order for the horizon to be center frame in our goggles. Now, the drone isn't going to be hovering in one place, it's going to be moving forwards because of the way the props are angled. So the greater the tilt of the camera, the faster the drone will move in a forward direction. Being able to modify the camera angle remotely is great because I can now choose the speed at which I want to fly at during my flight and not have to physically bring the drone back down to the ground and change it by hand. Now, the really cool thing is that you don't have to fly this FPV drone in manual or acro mode. You can fly it in normal or sport mode, just like any other DJI drone that you're already used to flying. It's great to be able to switch between the different modes, because if you're ever in a bad place while flying in manual mode, you can simply just change it back to normal mode and the drone will hover like a regular DJI drone. This is a really comforting safety feature that I wish I would have had back when I was first starting FPV. Now, I remember when I was first starting FPV, one of the hardest skills to master was precisely landing in one place. But now that we're able to put the drone into normal mode at any time, we can really easily land very accurately wherever we want without having to spend a ton of time practicing precision landings. Now, let's talk about the camera. The camera is able to record 4K at up to 60 frames per second and 1080 at up to 120 frames per second. 4K 60 looks really good, and I found it to grade really nicely. These are all clips shot at 4K 60. Now, the lens is ultra wide at 150 degrees. Now, you're only able to use the full 150 degrees when you're shooting at either 50 or 100 frames per second. When you're shooting 4K 60, you can go as wide as 142 degrees. DJI's stabilization algorithm has gotten really good. The footage that comes right out of the drone is buttery smooth, and this allows us to skip the whole process of having to stabilize our footage later on in post. DJI is really making big moves here and making FPV so much more immersive and fun with these resolution upgrades. You can easily change the camera settings in your goggles, as well as the shutter speed and ISO if you choose to switch out of the auto camera settings. You're also able to record both internally on the drone as well as on the goggles. This is great because if anything happens to your drone, you can have a copy of the file directly on your goggles. Now let's talk about the goggles. These are DJI's second generation of FPV goggles. They provide a crystal clear live view at 810p at 120 frames per second. Now, that might not sound like a lot of resolution, but you have to understand that before DJI even came out with their FPV system, this is the image that FPV pilots would be seeing. It's literally hideous. That's basically what every FPV pilot was used to up until 2019 when DJI had released their FPV system, which is now even better than their previous generation of goggles. It has a consistently stable, low latency, long range HD signal connection that I've found to be very reliable when flying. I'm really happy with this resolution increase because it just makes flying FPV that much more immersive. The goggles offer the same buttons and controls that I loved on the first model, and the menu layout only has a few minor changes, but overall it's pretty much the same as before. So with the new DJI FPV comes a completely new remote. It's much smaller and much lighter than the first model. One major change they made is the ability to unscrew the joysticks, allowing you to pack up the remote without having to worry about the joysticks getting damaged. This thing feels really nice in your hands and also gives you the option to optimize the resistance of the joysticks by turning these screws hidden in the back of the remote. On the left here, we have the scroll wheel, which allows us to change the pitch of the camera. And now we also have this new button that allows us to emergency brake and hover. When the pilot presses this button, it'll come to a stop and hover in one place. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the faster you're going, the longer it's going to take for you to actually stop and hover. So if you're going top speed, it's going to take you a second to actually stop and hover. But this is a huge feature because if you're ever in a tight situation, you don't know what to do, you can just hit that button and allow the drone to stop and hover in one place. And we also have the return to home button, which can be very useful. Now, DJI has also come out with this one-handed motion controller. I've never used anything like this before, so it felt pretty foreign to me at first, but I got the hang of it pretty much right away. It takes about 10 seconds to connect to your drone, and once it's linked, you're presented with a short instructional video in your goggles. Double-click the red button to start the props, and then hold the red button to get the drone to take off and hover at 1.2 meters. Then you're able to rotate the drone by moving the controller left and right like this. And to accelerate, pull the trigger. What I'm seeing right now is a white circle in the middle of the screen, and wherever I point the remote, that circle moves. It's almost like a Wii or something on your TV screen. It definitely felt pretty weird at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's a really fun and intuitive way to fly your drone. Now, you're only able to use the motion controller in the N or S mode. You can't use this remote for full manual. Now, that brings me to the DJI Virtual Flight Simulator. Everyone starts learning FPV in a simulator. Because of how difficult it is to fly FPV, it's vital to understand the controls in the simulator before you actually try anything in real life. I found the simulator to be a lot of fun, and I thought it was really cool that you can view it through the goggles, which makes it feel a little bit more like FPV. Now, the last thing that I'm really excited about is DJI's new Health Management System, or HMS. HMS can be found within the DJI Fly app, and it can be used to sense and keep track of the modules that need to be repaired or replaced on your drone. This is absolutely game-changing for the world of FPV because an inevitable part of the hobby is crashing. Everyone I know that flies FPV has crashed at one point or another, and with crashes comes damage to your drone. Previously, you'd have to spend tons of time troubleshooting and testing different components in your drone to figure out what's broken and what needs to be fixed or replaced. This is something I personally didn't even do because I just don't have that time. I'm always busy doing other projects, so I would just send my drones to a specialist to get them fixed. But now with DJI FPV, I could plug the drone into the DJI Fly app and allow the app to scan the drone and figure out what parts might be damaged or broken. And then from that point, you can just order the specific parts that you might need. And now obviously DJI knew this, so they designed the drone in a special way that allows you to replace a lot of the components very easily. So overall, I am just very impressed with this drone, and it makes me really excited to see where the future of FPV is going. If you're someone that's been wanting to get into FPV, but it just seemed too complicated and too hard to get into, this is probably the perfect drone for you. I personally think that with the launch of DJI FPV, DJI has really just taken the lead in the FPV scene. But overall, this drone has really surpassed all of my expectations as to where I thought FPV would be at in 2021. These are all really amazing advancements, and I'm really excited to have DJI FPV as part of my filmmaking toolkit. I hope you guys enjoyed this little review. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.